Some 1.7 million protesters took to the streets of Hong Kong this past weekend, even as fears of a crackdown loomed. It was part of ongoing clashes over democratic rights that's captured the attention of the world. And just today, a sign that it could be entering a new phase. With us now for more, lawyer and freelance radio host Andrea Chun and Cheuk Kwan, past chair of the Toronto Association for Democracy in China. Both are Hong Kong expats. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Before we started taping, I was talking to you about what it's like for you to be on this end, seeing everything unfold in Hong Kong. Because I think for a lot of us, it's the news, it's happening very far. We might not be, we're kind of disconnected from it. So Chuck, I'd like to start with you. What's it like for you on a personal level to see everything unfold in Hong Kong?
Well, because Hong Kong had been our home for many years. We came from there. So watching at long distance is like, there's a Chinese saying about watching a fire across the river. You can't help, you can't do anything yourself, but you're just watching it and feeling very kind of sad what Hong Kong has become.
Is there a sense of hopelessness?
For me, I think there's still some hope, although a lot of my friends and family over there that I've been reaching out, it's a lot of anxiety for me. I've been watching the protests unravel, and I think the feeling, and I echo Chuck's feelings, that I'm deeply, deeply saddened that a place where I grew up, something like this could happen. But having said that, I've spoken to a lot of friends who are out on the streets, and they're still very hopeful. And I think they're really, really brave. So for that, I'm extremely proud of what they're doing despite all the setbacks and pushbacks and, frankly, repercussions as to what could happen to them, personal safety and their jobs, etc.
Today there were some new developments. Before we talk about those developments, maybe we should talk about the background. And Chuck, how did these protests get started in the first place?
Basically, the younger generation are feeling hopeless. And the extradition bill, which was introduced by the chief executive, Carrie Lam, in a very rushed fashion, is bringing in the Chinese judicial system into Hong Kong by giving Hong Kong police and Hong Kong government the power to extradite anyone that China wants back to China to face trial, for example. And as we know, the Chinese justice system is not the perfect system, and they usually use trump-up charges. And I know that a few years back, when Canada was negotiating free trade agreement with China, China tagged on a condition saying you have to sign an extradition treaty with us, because they wanted to extradite Chinese nationals who have come to Canada to, let's say, run away from tax avoidance and whatnot. And my point at that time was, if Ai Weiwei, the international artist, was living in Vancouver, the Chinese could have arrested him and have RCMP arrest him and extradite him back to China, because they have used that tax evasion as a trump-up charges to suppress his dissent. So that, to me, is obviously the straw that broke the camel back.
And this extradition bill has been suspended, right? But it's not completely withdrawn?
It's not suspended. It's, I think she used the word dead, but that's not a legal term. Andrea would tell you that.
Okay. Andrea?
I think it's important to point out that the Hong Kong government, while pushing through this bill, has ignored a lot of demands by including the legal profession and voices against this bill. The discrepancy between the Chinese legal system, which we do not trust as being fair to accused, as having rule of law and due process and an independence of the judiciary. So all of that aside, what happened was on June the 9th, 1 million people went out on the streets of Hong Kong to protest against this bill, which had passed first reading. Despite 1 million people showing up on the streets, which any government at least a democratically elected government, would have listened. Hong Kong government merely issued a written statement that evening. Carrie Lam, the chief executive, did not come out to speak to the protesters or the citizens of Hong Kong, and insisted that the bill be pushed to second reading later that week. So in the middle of that week, protesters they were really upset by this, by the lack of respect of the opinions of the people. So there were scuffles in front of the legislature, at which point Hong Kong police started using tear gas on these protesters and started calling them rioters, which carried really
Which is
stiff
important,
sentences.
right? Because it carries a 10-year sentence?
Very important, because there have been previous convictions of rioting as a result of the 2014 umbrella movement. So that was a very important turning point. A few days later, 2 million people came out. And I have to stress, both these marches were extremely peaceful. And yet, the government merely, quote unquote, suspended the bill. And later on, Carrie Lam re-emphasized that the bill was dead. And that led to further discontent. And therefore, eventually protesters wanted 5 key demands from the Hong Kong government, including complete withdrawal of this proposed bill, a declaration that those were not rioters, withdrawal of all the rioting charges, an independent inquiry into all these events, and also universal suffrage eventually. Now, that's another story. That's a long story that we could possibly cover for another 20 minutes. But at the end of the day, I think all these protests that ensued, there were acts of violence, but more importantly, there was way more violence by the police, at which point where even the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has issued a statement against the way in which Hong Kong police used tear gas in enclosed areas multiple times and directly at protesters, and that was a breach of universal standards. And they urged the Hong Kong government to look into this and to change their tactics.
Well, there's been, it seems to have been very much the protesters asking for a conversation. And earlier today, the government of Hong Kong announced that they're open to discussions with the protesters. Why now, Chuck? Or are you surprised that this happened?
I'm a bit surprised, but I want to say that we have seen that movie too many times before. We kind of know how it will end, because this is a standard stalling tactics that the Hong Kong government has used. They used it in 2014 during the umbrella movement. Every time they're just playing this long game of saying, okay, we're going to wait it out. We're going to pretend we're going to have dialogue. It's an improvement over last time when she absolutely refuses to have a dialogue with the protesters. And now at least there's an improvement in that sense. However, I'm not optimistic. I think it's a stalling tactic. Everybody's looking at October 1st. That's the national day, the day that the 70th anniversary of the Communist Revolution in China. It's going to be a big celebration in China, and they want to have it in Hong Kong. So I believe that China very much wants to resolve this before October 1st, either by force or by attrition.
Andrea, are you optimistic that this will lead to a peaceful resolution?
My take is a little bit different from Chuck's take. I think Carrie Lam came out today as a result of the extremely peaceful protest that took place on Sunday. But last week was very important. I still maintain that it was a turning point in the entire movement.
Why is that?
We see the elder statesman of China, Yang Jieqi, who met Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State for the U.S., last week in a surprise visit to New York. After that, we suddenly saw Mr. Trump various tweets about Hong Kong situation, and he literally linked the Hong Kong situation to the talks between the U.S. and China. There were a lot of reports about troops amassing close to the city of Hong Kong in Shenzhen, and whether Chinese troops would move into the city. All of that took a turn when the U.S. took a hard stance against this issue.
So you're saying that it was because the U.S. Became involved that Hong Kong is changing its position?
My view is that Mr. Yang's visit was a visit to see what the reaction would be. And at this juncture, where there's a lot at stake for China, including if they were to move troops into Hong Kong, there's a lot of money at stake for China. There are a lot of Chinese companies who are publicly listed in Hong Kong. There's a lot of Chinese mainlanders who have a lot of wealth stuck in the city of Hong Kong. Not only that, more importantly, I would argue that there's a free flow of money in currency through Hong Kong that does not exist in any other city in China. So we're talking about personal wealth, we're talking about an economic disaster if they were to move in. Coupled with that, Marco Rubio has mentioned the Magnitsky Act on them, and there's in the works what they call a Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act in the US Congress, which has bipartisan support. So if they really threaten to use that against China, and if China still moves into Hong Kong, that would create a huge disaster, not only for the Chinese government, but for a lot of officials and a lot of Chinese mainlanders. So I think they have softened the stance. On Sunday, when the protests took place, there was much less police presence, to my surprise, than before. So I think that was a turning point. So I am not as surprised about Carrie Lam coming out today to offer an olive branch and to say open dialogues. The protesters are not really taking that in, and they have no confidence in speaking with the Carrie Lam government. Having said that, it's better than nothing.
But they want her to resign, yes?
Oh, absolutely. Now, whether she has a right to resign, I mean, there are rumors flying around whether she's resigned before. It's not so simple. It's losing face on the Beijing's government. And secondly, they have to prepare for who's going to take her place. So the administration has lost the confidence in, I think Hong Kong people don't trust them anymore. But having said that, to be fair, there's a lot of division in Hong Kong people. This is a deeply divided issue. So if opinions could turn, and if Beijing can wait for Hong Kong's opinions to turn the other way and say, look, maybe you can stop the protests, you can trust the government a bit more, at least look, they're trying to negotiate, then maybe they're hoping that the protests would fizzle out and at least die down for a bit before October 1st.
Earlier on, you said that the protesters were younger people. So I'm assuming that the people who might be opposed to this are older people, or who's protesting and who's against it? Chuck?
I think you'll see like the 1.7 million march, that you have grandmothers, you have grandkids, and everybody was out there. And it's pretty much a very intergenerational thing. However, like Andrea said, the main push are the 18 to 25-year-olds. These were teenagers 5 years ago during the Umbrella Movement, when the protesters occupied the central Hong Kong for 76 days. So, and that fizzles out. So I think they all have learned from that, and I'm in full admiration of the courage and the creativity that these younger generation, the whole movement is leaderless. There's no one single leader that you can pinpoint upon. And here I want to just say one thing that I got more recently. I have a friend who is very in touch with the Hong Kong situation. He knows all these people in high places, including Carrie Lam. And he did tell me the other day that Carrie Lam actually sent her assistant to come see him and say, this is before she was pushing through the extradition treaty, that she said, should I do it? And of course, he told her no. But she went ahead and pushed it anyway. And this kind of disrupts the whole idea that the whole thing was a Beijing commanded performance or pushing through the extradition bill. We found out now is actually her own will. It's very typical bureaucrat trying to appease your overlord and saying, look.
And who's her overlord?
Overlords, the Beijing people from Beijing. They want to say, hey, look, I'm doing good stuff for you. You know, you can reward me.
But you think she misstepped in this one?
Oh, obviously. It's her huge miscalculation. And you can see her body language and the language she uses right after the first protest, she's taken on more and more of the whole communist lingo, as in you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. You are breaking our sovereignty. You know, you're not respecting China as our country.
Well, what's the perception of the protests in China on the mainland?
I think the Chinese are definitely seeing this in a totally different light. And just to respond to maybe your earlier question as to who are the people in Hong Kong who actually oppose the movement, I do have a lot of friends who oppose the movement because they just see it as a law and order thing. They see it in a vacuum as to do not disrupt stability. They would like to keep their prosperity and stability. So I hate to generalize, but there are a lot of folks who are opposed to this movement because they are the wealthier and the more established folks. So you see a lot of the protests taking place in the less affluent streets of Hong Kong rather than in the more affluent parts of the city. As for China and mainland Chinese, I think a lot of them completely sees this as a direct challenge to the authority of Beijing over Hong Kong and its control over Hong Kong. They do not see it as a freedoms issue. They do not see it as an issue about a bill. They see images of violence, and they see that certain protesters were against the way China has dealt with the Hong Kong situation over the years. We're talking about whether they respect the Hong Kong Basic Law and the Sino-British Joint Declaration, in which Hong Kong was promised high degree of autonomy, rule of law, personal freedoms, personal security. All of that has been seriously eroded over the last few years.
Let's talk about that. So Hong Kong was a British colony until 1997 when it was handed back to China. What is Hong Kong's status within China today?
So Hong Kong is what is known as operating under a one country, two systems, whereby as of 1997, the handover, there is a mini constitution called the Hong Kong Basic Law, where Hong Kong people have been promised a high degree of autonomy, a high degree of freedom, and by and large, in generally speaking, they have been able to keep their system, the British system, the way of life for 50 years. And more importantly, the reason why over the last 15 years or so there's been so much discontent is that in that document, they promised universal suffrage eventually. Now, when is that going to happen? That wasn't going to happen. So over the last 10 or 15 years, that Hong Kong people were not given the right, the universal suffrage which they were promised in this document of electing all the legislators and the chief executive. So that has caused a lot of movement, including, everybody knows about the 2014 umbrella movement. So that has built up a pent-up call for China to live up to this document. On the other hand, you've got a lot of pushback from the, shall we say, the more established pro-Beijing, pro-government folks who just say, why rock the boat? China is doing well. By extension, Hong Kong's economy is doing well. We're all well employed. We're all prospering. Don't rock the boat. Why do this? We don't need to vote for the chief executive, or none of that is as important as the economic situation. So the stability and prosperity seems to be most important to the folks who oppose all these movements.
When you watch, sorry, Chuck.
I want to just say about the security thing and stability thing. Tiananmen Square massacre 30 years ago.
30 years ago this summer, right?
This summer was about security and stability. They don't want people to be over kind of like, they want to suppress the kind of democracy and freedom of speech, kind of Western values favoring in China right now. And Hong Kong is but one chess piece in the whole China situation. We have Xinjiang, where 1 million out of the 6 million people are now in what they call concentration camps. We have Tibetans who have been Sinofied by having mass amount of Han ethnic Chinese like myself and Andrea moving into dilute the whole demographics of the Tibetan population. So, and then you have Taiwan, who China has been courting for the last 70 years with threats of carrots and sticks. And now Taiwan is saying, hey, we don't want to be like Hong Kong, So this is something that China is really fearful right now, is if we let Hong Kong fall, or something happens with even putting tanks into the Hong Kong streets, we're going to be looked upon as something by the international community and by our own constituent as something that China is falling apart. And that's something that absolutely do not want.
Taiwan has actually offered amnesty for the protesters?
No,
No?
Taiwan doesn't have the refugee, the standard political asylum law that I know that there are a few people who have run off to Taiwan. However, I would just want to get back to the extradition treaty. The difference between this time and 2014, 5 years ago, when the Hong Kong protesters occupied Hong Kong for 76 days, they were asking for what Andrea was talking about, universal suffrage, one person, one vote election of the chief executive, which hasn't happened. However, that was still a little bit more abstract for people and say, well, we don't care about that. As long as our life is happy, we're making a lot of money, why do we bother whether we should be electing our own chief executive? This time, the extradition bill hits home, because we're talking about personal security, personal safety, that I can be in transit, be yanked off the plane and taken back to China for trial of any trump-up charges the China wants to do. And that's a thing that really, really scares a lot of people. And the whole younger generation, very importantly, 18 to 25 age group.
Well, I just want to go back to the younger generation, because under the system, it's the one country, two systems principle, correct? And as of 2047, Hong Kong will become part of China. Because when you watch the protest, you see there's a sense of urgency and fearlessness on these young people's faces. Is part of this, because they know what life is like, what life might be like after 2047,
right.
That for them it's now or never?
I want to equate this with, your analogy of a frog in the boiling pot of water. The 50-year time frame was negotiated between Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher, giving kind of transition period. At that time, Deng Xiaoping was hoping that Hong Kong is so far ahead that China would catch up to Hong Kong, and the two places will amalgamate and assimilate into one integrated whole China. But that hasn't happened, because the years after Tiananmen Square massacre, China has regressed, especially since Xi Jinping took power. So what we have is now it's going the other way around. Hong Kong is fearful, Hong Kong people are fearful that they will become part of China in the very regressive way. And this is no different from, you're putting a frog in a pot of water. First 10, 20 years, hey, it's nice and warm. But I think they're realizing the heat right now.
Is there a worry that this could become another Tiananmen Square massacre?
I think it was touch and go last week, personally, but I think it went the other way, thank goodness. As I said earlier, I think it had to do with the international pressures, especially the US pressure. The President Xi's regime right now is facing a lot of challenges, especially within domestically. Their economy is not growing as much as it did in the last 10 years or so. They have to negotiate with Mr. Trump, which is a very worthy adversary, I would say. So to them, they have a lot of issues on their plate. And now, is this a good time? I don't think so. But that was probably one of the considerations. But last week, I definitely think it could have been touch and go. A lot of my friends in Hong Kong who went out on the streets, they were not afraid. They were thinking that it was just scare tactics, that they saw images of the troops amassing in the close by city of Shenzhen. They were just saying that's classic just scare tactics. But I don't think so. I think they could have, if things really turned. We can never really tell what's happening in Beijing. It's hard to read all the tea leaves as to, even with I think the regime, there could be camps and different thoughts as to how to handle this Hong Kong situation.
We have a minute left, and I want to get your thoughts on 30 seconds from each of you about this. There have been demonstrations around the world in support of the pro-democracy movement as well as pro-Beijing rallies. Here are some examples from Vancouver, which is a pro-democracy protest. Picture from Sydney, which is pro-Beijing. And here in Paris, a clash of both sides. What do you make of this division?
I think it's a mainland Hong Kong divide right now. I'm afraid that just like everywhere else in Canada, we're under the influence of the Chinese government. They're sending in massive amount of international students, for example, who are probably paid by the Chinese consulate to come up to these rallies and to protest and to show their nationalism, to show their patriotism. That's the appeal that the Chinese consulate are making to the Chinese diaspora.
And Andrea?
I think nationalism is the word here. I think a lot of mainlanders from China do not see this as a democratic issue. Rather, they see it as a direct challenge to Beijing's authority and this unity of China. And Hong Kong being part of China should just toe the official line. I think the perspectives are completely different between the two groups. And that's why they feel so passionate, and that's why there were clashes that we've seen even including Toronto.
Well, thank you so much, Cheuk and Andrea, for helping us get some insight into this very complicated situation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.